Alright, I believe we're good to go. Hello one, hello all. Welcome to the stream, whether you're living or unliving. I'm your host, Richter Graves, A-Star Pilot, and the Rambler in the Void. And also for tonight, I guess, Certified Yapper. I don't usually do these kind of streams. I usually do gaming stuff, but for tonight, we're gonna go with a talking stream. This is going to be audio only. There's not going to be any like visuals besides what you see on your stream already. So, you know, if you want to go do something else or whatever, and just listen in. That's cool. That should work out just fine. So yeah, we're going to get into it and do some. We're going to talk some stories. Some, let's say, quote unquote, real stories. These are stories that I've heard over the years, read on the internet, stuff like that. They're not things that I like scraped, I don't know, like a fiction author's creepypasta blog for or whatever. These are stories that have at least some kind of kernel of truth to them. Now, how much of them are true, how much of them are not, I don't know. And we probably never will know. But they are all very strange, and they at least have some kind of grounding in truth. They're purported to be true. Let's just put it like that. Whether they are actually true or not, well, I'll leave that for you to decide. So yeah, let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to get into before we get started. I don't think so. It's Halloween night. The sun's gone down. So let's go ahead and settle into the gathering gloom. And get yourself a blanket, right? Cover your toes so the things that lurk in the shadows don't nibble them off while you're listening. I don't know. Get yourself like some tea or some hot cider or something. Or if you're a sociopath like me, you can drink coffee at 8 p.m. and enjoy the stories. Alright, so let's pull this up. Now, the first story I have, I like to call The Robo-Granny of Mount Shasta. Right? So you know it's going to be freaking weird. And I would like to start with a article. So this is from the Siskiyou Daily News. This is from September 6, 2011. The headline reads, "Missing boy found after he wandered away from a McLeod campground." A 3-year-old boy who went missing Friday at a county campground was found cold and frightened, but unharmed. According to Siskiyou County Sheriff's Office press release, the department responded to a report of a missing child around 7:30 p.m. Friday. The 3-year-old boy had gone missing from Fowler's Camp, located in the McLeod area in the vicinity of the McLeod River. Deputies from the Sheriff's Office were joined by the Department's Search and Rescue Unit, as well as members from the California Highway Patrol, Weed Police Department, Eureka Police Department, CAL FIRE, McLeod Volunteer Fire Department, and the U.S. Forest Service. Law enforcement officials searched the campground and conducted an extensive grid search of the area, the release said. When a set of child-sized footprints were found along the shoreline of a creek in a heavily wooded area, a Sheriff's Office K-9 team was deployed to track the trail created by the person who left the footprints. The K-9 team located the boy at approximately 11:50 p.m. The child was cold and frightened, but overall he was in good condition, according to the release. I would like to thank all of the participating local, state, and federal agencies, both regular and volunteer, for their invaluable assistance, support, and incredible teamwork during this operation, Sheriff John Lopi said. These men and women worked under very challenging circumstances, and their individual and group efforts wrote a very happy ending to what could have been a tragic story. And that is the end of the article. Okay, next story. I'm just joking. It gets much weirder. So, I mean, that wrap-up seems pretty tame, right? Kid goes missing, some hours later he's found, and everything's fine, right? Well, interestingly, a year later, in November 2012, there was a forum post made on a forum called AboveTopSecret.com. And this is a forum dedicated to like paranormal type stuff and weird things and conspiracies and all kinds of stuff. But this was a post created by a user by the name of MissCat1. And it's titled, "Abduction or Imagination is Something in Our Forests." And I thought this was interesting to actually go through. So it reads this. So this is from November 2012. So this is a little over a year later. And she writes, "Last fall, my 3.5-year-old grandson was lost in the Shasta Forest for 5 hours. Thanks to volunteers and rescue personnel, he was found. My son said he was there, then within a second he was gone. They thought he'd been abducted by other campers, which is kind of scary in its own right. But about 3 weeks after this happened, he was at my house, and out of the blue, he announced, "I don't like the other Grandma Cappy." She says this is the name for her, Grandma Cappy. I said, "What are you talking about, buddy? I'm the only Grandma Cappy." He said, "Don't you remember when I was lost in the woods? Well, the other Grandma Cappy grabbed me and took me to a creepy place. She's really a robot." I was thinking he was telling a story, so I asked what was creepy about it. Why do you think she was a robot? He responds, "It was a cave with spiders, and there was purses and guns. I was too scared, so I didn't touch anything, but when she climbed the ladder, the light made her look like a robot. There were other robots too, but they didn't move." So I asked, "What did she do with you, buddy?" He responds, "She made me lay down and look at my tummy. Then she tried to get me to poop on a sticky paper, but I couldn't go. She told me that I'm from outer space and they put me in my mom's tummy. Then she told me she took me back to the river and said to wait under a bush until someone found me." She continues, "I called my son to ask what the heck she was letting my grandson watch on TV. I told him what he said, and he said that he had told them the same story a few days earlier. But I chalked it up to having the smartest, most amazing kid with the biggest imagination ever, as you would probably expect from a grandmother. I know that kids have imaginations," she continues, "but it was the pooping on sticky paper that really makes me wonder. I've never watched a TV program that mentioned pooping on sticky paper. There were other details too much to list. But one of the reasons I'm bothered by this story is because I was camping in the same area in the year before, and this is the same woman, the grandmother. And I woke up one morning face down in the dirt, out of my tent and sleeping bag. I had a puncture wound in the back of my head. I'm a grandma in my 50s. I don't sleep in the dirt. I was violently ill, too sick to even pack and go home. I thought it was a spider bite, and it took me very long to feel normal. I had no creativity, no emotions. My friend was camping with us. He was sleeping in his camper. He also had a bite, quote unquote, on the back of his neck and was violently ill. We were in separate sleeping areas. Before we went to bed, there were red eyes shining through the trees out in our flashlights. We thought a herd of deer was trying to get to the river, so we didn't think too much about it. But now I wonder. My friend was checking into wildlife cameras. He wants to go up there and place them around the campground. One weird thing about this place is that there was no wildlife. The only birds we saw were 2 crows. They flew in, sat in a tree, and watched us. I thought they were waiting for us to drop Cheetos in the dirt. At the time, we were creeped out by them. I camp a lot. Usually there are butterflies, birds, squirrels, etc. This time there was nothing. We didn't even see a bee. My son has forbidden me to ask my grandson about the incident, because you can create a false memory by repetitive reminding. So for a year I have not mentioned it to him, but he's 4.5 now, and I asked him again about what happened. He repeated the same story, except he said she took him to a dungeon instead of a cave. It'll be interesting to see if he has a memory of these events when he's about 8 or 9. This was at McLeod, California, he says. So the thread goes on, and in fact this is quite a long thread, and it spans many years, because a lot of people kind of latched onto this story. And so people come in, they talk about how they're glad that the grandson is safe and things like that, but they also ask questions, and there's a lot of back and forth. So I kind of clumped through the thread. It's about 19 pages long, and people can go look at it if they want to read through the full thing. She does get into some things like Agenda 21 and some other stuff that's kind of like contextually related, but it's kind of her speculation about stuff. I wound up cutting out a lot of that. I just wanted to kind of focus on the details of the specific story because it's so strange. But I went through there and I pulled out all the details that I could find, some other stuff. So these are some of the responses, the things that she's included in her responses to other people. So also she says, I didn't include this in the first post, but when I went and asked him what the other grandma looked like, he insisted she looked like me. In his words, she had your same hair, your feet, and even your face. In his mind, he was taking a walk with me. Now that scares me deeply, she says. When he talked about the light sparkled on her and she looked like a robot, I got the mental impression of a hologram, not a robot. I asked him what a robot is, and he said, it's made out of metal and it has a remote control. I don't know what to make of it, she says. In another post, she goes on to say, I have wondered if I had a stroke that night, and this is her referencing her camping experience where she woke outside of her tent, face down in the dirt, evidently. She says, I wondered if I had a stroke that night. I questioned Alzheimer's too, no drinking or drugs. I was gold panning for most of the day and wondered if I exposed myself to mercury in the creek. I found naturally occurring mercury before, but I didn't see any in the pan on this trip. but it doesn't explain my friend with the same wound and also very ill. My grandson could have just gotten lost and made up a story, but he was only 3 when he told us this. I didn't write the post to get believers. I wrote it to see if there were any others with similar experiences and to let people know that we have experienced some strange things in the forest. Now she says the grandson's 3. I have younger people in my family that I've watched grow up over the years. 3-year-olds can tell kind of crazy whoppers, but I don't know. To me, it's kind of a toss-up, right? But it is a very strange thing for a 3-year-old to talk about and say. Okay, so she continues another post. It has been hard as a grandparent to figure out where the real experience is. On one hand, I can see he related the experience to something he saw on TV and tried to explain it from what he knew. Then the question is, did he fill in the gaps with his imagination? I just know something happened. I don't believe he could make up all these details either. So I believe he believes he experienced exactly what he told me. I think the truth is that he was examined by someone or something. I don't know by who or what. I do know this. When I think about it, I get a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach, as I suppose you would expect from a grandmother, and that white-hot shaky feeling overwhelms me. I think it's my intuition. I try to forget all about this story and file it away, but I just feel very compelled to share it. I really think more is going on in our national forests than we know. Let's see, some more stuff. Someone actually asked her about if there was any details from the rescue responders that could corroborate and stuff like that, and she says that he wasn't questioned by the rescue responders. The hundreds/thousands of volunteer rescue people were just so relieved he was found, and no one questioned it if it was an abduction. He told me that he was told that the bush would have been a good spot and that he should wait for help, presumably by the quote-unquote robot grandma. The officers told my son that if he wouldn't have climbed under the bush, he probably would not have survived the ordeal. He very easily could have fallen into the river or got eaten by a wild animal. He was found over a mile up the trail he was on, followed by the McCloud River. It was way past dark when he was located. The rescue team several times stated they were amazed that he was smart enough to crawl under the bush. He was found by K9. He said that he thought the dog was an animal and he was going to get eaten. When he heard his name being called, he said he jumped out of the bush screaming, "Here I am! Here I am!" That part makes me very emotional. It's hard to even type it. This happened on Labor Day weekend 2011, which is why there was such a huge volunteer response. And she actually brings up a good point here, because she talks about it being over a mile at the trail. Now, I can believe that a 3-year-old might come up with some kind of crazy story, right? Crazy imagination or something like that. That seems to be about the age when they start telling tales and things. Could a 3.5-year-old get a mile up the trail after dark? I don't know about that one. That one seems a little bit different. So she was further asked about details about where he was taken. And she says that he said the guns and purses were on a shelf and they were dirty. So he's talking about the things that he saw in the cave/quote-unquote dungeon. He axed things out when he talked about the other robots. He pushed himself back and became stiff frozen with a distorted look on his face. My best description of the way he looked was like Han Solo in the Carbonite. So if you've ever seen Star Wars, you know what she's talking about. It's kind of like a, hands up, face all distorted, sort of frozen look. Which is quite strange for the other quote-unquote robots. Whatever the heck he was talking about. So, as I said before, the thread goes on for over the course of several years, and it's about 19 pages long. So this is fast-forwarding to 2014. And this kind of gets into some stuff, like most of the details about the individual account that we're talking about, the Robo Granny, whatever it was, have already been covered. But I also wanted to include some aspects of the kind of things that happen to people when they go through stuff like this. I think there's a tendency when people have experiences like this and share them, there's a tendency among some people to think like, oh, this person's just trying to get attention or whatever. And maybe, like, that's possible. If this is all just made up, then yeah, like someone could just be having a laugh, right? Come up with some creepy, crazy story to see if people believe it. That's possible, and I'm not gonna rule that out. But she goes on to talk about the kind of evolution of things, and this is over the next 6 years. So the first post I'm reading from here is from 2014. She says, I'm not going to go into details because I really don't want a book or movie made about our private stuff. My daughter-in-law is having a new baby, and strange things are happening, to the point that my son stays up all night with a loaded shotgun. He doesn't sleep until my grandson goes to school, and he has physical marks on his body he cannot explain. So that's from 2014. A year later, she goes into how things have kind of gotten worse for her relationships with her family. She says, I see the behaviors. You mentioned my daughter-in-law. I'm very worried about her. She no longer will talk to me. It's like she's been hypnotized to hate me. I can't put my finger on exactly why, when, or where she suddenly started hating me, and it makes it really hard at holidays. And to see my grandsons. I've tried to talk to her and apologize for whatever thing I'm guilty of, but she will have none of it. My son is going through a lot right now. Right, and so it shows that there's obviously some kind of interpersonal issue going on within the family now. She seems to think that it's some kind of force which is acting upon the family now that they've kind of been introduced to this problem, right? And this thing has happened and she sees it as the source of it, and there's some kind of force acting on ruining their relationships. That's actually a somewhat common thing to happen in situations like this. If people think they go into these to get like fame and fortune and stuff like that, that's almost never the case of how these pan out. I've read up on these things for a lot of years because, high strangeness and Fortean stories and things like that is something that's kind of a hobby of mine, right? I really like it. And I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that's had a good ending, a happy ending in dealing with these things. Now, it could just be that she's got interpersonal issues like a lot of family has, right? And that she's just describing to this. Maybe they're just sick of her hearing about it. Maybe they want to move on and she doesn't. Who knows? But her last post that she put on the thread was in 2020. And it would have seemed that they've at least hit some sort of point of rest as far as this situation. Because someone else asked her about it, and she said, in 2020, this happened several years ago, so it isn't a thing for us anymore. But we were invited to participate in the filming, and it made a great memory for my grandson instead of just the terrifying experience on Mount Shasta. Now, when she talks about the filming, she's talking about, she actually had several, I'm going to say like 2 or 3 different TV shows. So there were these TV shows, on like the Travel Channel and stuff, that do these paranormal shows about weird stuff that happens, and from what I understand, this story was shown on a few of those. And so that's what she's talking about. They were there for the filming of those and to kind of tell the story of what happened. And evidently by 2020, they had moved on. Whether it was an amicable ending or not, we don't know. We don't know how much of this is true. We don't know how much of this is false. If they're filming about it, then presumably they would have had to actually meet some sort of TV studio execs or something like that, you know what I mean? So the likelihood that it's just like some random person coming up with a crazy story about a family who are going through this and how their grandson met a robotic version of them in the forest and was abducted. I think that seems unlikely. It seems to me that it's more likely that something did probably happen. Maybe they just misunderstood what's going on, or heck, maybe there's a robot granny out there in Mount Shasta. I don't know. Mount Shasta is known for being kind of a weird place. There's a lot of stuff that goes on there. There's weird stuff in the woods and UFOs and all kinds of crazy stories. If you look up paranormal Mount Shasta, you will find oodles on noodles of weird stories about Mount Shasta. So what actually happened out there, we don't know. But it was certainly a very strange story. Okay, so with that out of the way, we're moving on to Australia, from California to Australia. So this is about a region known as the Pilliga. The Pilliga Scrub, or Pilliga Forest, is a region of Australia. It's in New South Wales. It's about a little over 3,000 square miles of semi-arid woodland. And essentially, the thing about Australia is it's one of these places that it's kind of similar to the United States in the fact that it's got roughly the same landmass. The problem is it's only got like a tenth of the number of people that the US does. So Australia is like this massive continent, this massive country that is just largely wilderness. It's huge, and a lot of it is largely unexplored. Or I don't want to say unexplored because we have like satellite imaging and stuff now. It's hard to say it's quote unquote unexplored. right? It's not like Cortez going into the jungles of South America or whatever, but it's largely uninhabited, and there's lots of stuff out there that are not routinely watched, right? Author Eric Rolls, who wrote a book about the Pilliga, describes it as this in his own sort of author-like flowery language. He says, "It is busy with trees, with animals, and with men. It is lonely and beautiful. It is 1,000,000 wild acres, and there's no other forest like it." And judging by some of the stories and stuff that come out of the Pilliga, I think he's probably right. The Pilliga is, as I said, it's a semi-arid forested region in New South Wales. Some of it is like a national forest type area, but other areas are not. Formerly, it was heavily forested, as I understand, so there was sort of an industry that arose around the Pilliga forest of them doing lumber stuff. And so you have this area that's semi-arid woodland, which is dotted with these little towns that grew up around the foresting industry. And in between those towns, it's just kind of intersected by all these old forestry roads. And the Pilliga has a sort of spooky reputation, as I've read. Obviously, you know, I'm American, I'm from Missouri. I'm not from Australia or this area, so I can't say, you know, primary evidence. But a lot of the stuff that I read about and look into, this area has a spooky reputation, including things like Min Min lights. So like Min Min lights are like a weird phenomenon that's witnessed in Australia. And Australia has its own like versions of a lot of different cryptids and bizarre anomalies. Min Min lights is one of those that like to, you know, move around on highways and chase people and stuff. Seemingly some kind of sentient lights that show up and no one's really sure what they are. Other things are yowies, which is sort of like the Australian version of Bigfoot. And in fact, I've got a news article here from the Sydney Morning Herald. This is from March 13th, 1977. The headline reads, "Missing link sought in mystery. Mysterious ape-like creature thought to be a yowie has been bothering residents on Oxley Island near Turry." Now this isn't in the Pilliga, but it does talk about yowies and kind of gives some, well, it gives a story about kind of the things that yowies might get up to. So the article reads, "Families on the island report hearing blood-curdling screams and shrieks at night, and the noises are quite alien to the quiet river island, which relies on dairying for its livelihood. Residents are now convinced that the screams are connected with the sighting of a strange creature by island resident Miss Joff Gee. Miss Gee looked out her kitchen window recently to see a huge black furry creature standing on the end of their jetty, waving its arms around. I ran to get the binoculars for a close-up view and was sure that we had an enormous ape on the wharf," Miss Gee said. Unfortunately, I can't do an Australian accent, at least not a good one, so I'm not even going to try. "I was going down to investigate when the telephone rang, and when I returned, the animal had disappeared," she said. Several days later, the family returned to the outing to find their 1,000-gallon water tank had been pushed over at the back door. Her son and some friends found a set of footprints leading across a soft field. So, before I go on, 1,000 gallons of water is pretty heavy. You ever had to move water, like buckets of water? Like a 5-gallon bucket of water ain't light. You know, 1,000 gallons is pretty substantial. I'm not saying the water tank was necessarily full, because it's talking about the tank being 1,000 gallons, but, you know, it doesn't take very many gallons to make something pretty much unmovable by humans. Anyway, continuing. "The marks were unusual and not like any animal on the island, although some thought it could perhaps have been a bear walking upright. Miss Gee said that wherever the animal is thought to have been people can detect a very strong smell." Hold on, that didn't sound right. There might be a typo here. "Said that wherever the animal is thought to have been people can detect a very strong smell." There we go. So it's leaving behind a scent. "The island's recent experiences have only come to light when the residents heard that the naturalist Mr. Rex Gilroy will be visiting Taree and Barrington next month to search for evidence of the yowie. Reports of the beast's activities appear to be most heavily concentrated on the eastern coastal belt of the continent. The word yowie means great hairy man in early Aboriginal folklore. Mr. Gilroy believes the yowie is a surviving remnant of a pre-Ice Age man-like ape of which the abominable snowman and America's Bigfoot are also surviving relatives." So, yowies are something that's kind of, it's like a hometown cryptid for Australia, and there's reports of yowies and things in the Pilliga. Obviously, there's reports of Gowies in a lot of places in Australia. But there's also other things that's specific about this area that kind of weirds people out. For instance, one of the things that I've read is that truckers who go through the region tend not to stop there. Obviously, long-haul truckers and stuff, when they get tired, a lot of times they'll just pull over the side of the road and sleep for a while or whatever. The general consensus I've read about is that truckers do not do that in the Pilliga. If they're moving through the Pilliga and they get tired, they just keep trucking until they get out of it before they go to sleep or anything like that. And, well, there may be good reason for that, as we'll see here in just a little bit. But there's another legend that relates to Pilliga, known as the Pilliga Princess. And this relates to a woman who originally, she was an Aboriginal woman, which is kind of strange because other things I've read about this area would indicate that the Aboriginals tend to stay out of it. They don't like going there, which would, kind of follow along the lines of it being kind of a spooky and weird place. But evidently, this one was a bit of an exception to the rule. So she was an Aboriginal woman in her mid-50s. This was in 1993. That's right. So in 1993, there was this woman who would kind of travel these old forestry roads between these towns in the Pilliga. And unfortunately, one night in 1993, she was crossing one of the roads at night, and a truck was coming along, didn't or couldn't slow down in time, and wound up striking her and killing her. And it said that the roads of the Pilliga, these old forestry roads, are haunted by her ghost that travels around. And there's lots of claims of sightings of the Pilliga Princess and all that jazz. But the thing that really made me talk about this area is actually something that I heard, I guess several years ago now. This is a clip that I got, I listened to a while back, and I had to go hunt it down. It was actually a little bit difficult to find. And I'm going to pull it up, and I'm going to play it for you right now. So this is, let me see if I can find it. So this is an account, and I guess this is like a broadcast company or something, like a radio station in Australia, who was having, I don't know if it was like a Halloween special or if it was just like some kind of weird special reporting they were doing from the Pilliga. But they got a call in from a man who goes by the name of Bongo. This is an Australian man who talks about an experience that he had several years before. So I'm going to go ahead and play that for you. It's about 5 minutes long, a little bit more, and I'm just going to play the whole thing. So have a listen and enjoy.
Good morning, Bongo.
Oh, hello there. This is Bongo here. Yeah, I'm at the Happy Day Stay Retreat. Miss Annie's woke me up and says that they're talking about what happened to me back in 78. That's why I'm here.
Where are you exactly?
Happy Day Stays Retreat, like a sanitarium.
Okay.
I was bringing a new vehicle down, brand new vehicle down from Balata, heading towards Narrabri in 1978. In September it was 78, and heading for Tamworth, and I missed the turn off out of Narrabri to go to Gunnedah, and I kept going. I didn't know where I was going, and I saw these old mileage pegs on the side of the road. They'd been like painted over in those days, and I thought the engraver in it was a G, like for Gunnedah, but in actual fact they were a C for, turned out to be Coonabarabran.
Right, okay.
And about halfway along the road sort of thing, I started to get a bit concerned. The fuel was running pretty low, and in the distance I saw what turned out to be in those days a telecom beam heading my way. So I got out and I waved him down. It was pretty late in the afternoon, not just before dusk it was. Anyway, he pulled up and he cracked the window down just to fry it a little bit. And I said, look, I don't know where I am. Can you tell me where I am, mate? And he said, yeah. He said, you're in the middle of the Pilliga. Do you know where that is? I said, no, never heard of it. He said, what's your problem? I said, I'm nearly out of fuel. What? Can you tell me where I can get some fuel? He said, you're about the equal distance from here to Coonabarabran and Narrabri, it wouldn't matter. Anyway, I said, I'll nearly have a fuel, I'd never get back. Anyway, I asked him whether he was going to Narrabri, and asked him whether he could ring the NRMA or when he got there or something to bring me out some fuel as I was a member.
Yeah.
And he said, you won't get anyone to come out here after dark. And anyway, he didn't explain why, but
Right.
anyway,
So you were stuck
I ended
there.
up staying in this big old four-wheel drive all through the night, and about 3:30, 4:45, this thing just fair started a rocking, and all these funny weird lights and that were dancing around outside, and I looked out, and what looked through the window at me is why I'm in this state today. He pulled the door off the hinges, and this thing, like, it defies the explanation. What it looked like, it was horrific, and it took me through the bush a fair way.
So it grabbed hold of you.
And we ended up at this, I suppose you'd call it a humpy sort of a thing, and this thing had a real fetish, obviously, for real thin, bow-legged, knock-kneed, white, hairy legs. He had pairs of legs hanging up, and when he realised that I was no good to him, he took me back. He took me back to the edge of the road, whatever it was. I assume it was a he. If it was a she, there's something wrong in the world. But
Bongo.
I never ever saw him again. And a timber truck picked me up the next morning when it went through, and he took me to Coonabarabran, and it wasn't long after that they made me stay at Happy Days Day Retreat, and I've been here ever since.
Bongo, that is just an amazing story.
And Miss Annie tells me apparently that there's some idiot out there in the middle of it somewhere last week or something, attempting fate. There's got to be something wrong with the person.
Can you give us if I can't not pushing you too hard, what did it look like?
I can't explain it. It was horrible.
Pretty scary story there, Bongo, and thank you for that.
Oh.
And you look after yourself, okay? I'm going to pass your concerns on to Trev, who is our roving reporter, Trevor Chappell and Anna Mulder, who we've got out there in the Pilliga Scrub tonight. Bongo, thanks for your call, all right? You look after.
Fine now.
Good morning.
Isn't that such a creepy story? So he's a truck driver, or some sort of transport. He's taking a car up there, up through the Pilliga, and I don't know. He encounters something there overnight while he's waiting for gas. Right? Tears the car off the hinges. Something that evidently is so horrible to look at he can't even describe it. And takes him off. The creepiest part about that story is that it takes him off through the Pilliga to some sort of location, right? And if you listen, at that location it had like pairs of legs hanging up, which is exceptionally strange. But man, I heard that story some years ago and I found it extremely creepy back then. Again, like the first story, is it true? Who knows, right? Maybe it's just a guy who's like a really good actor. I don't know, but I mean, he sold it pretty well. If it was not real, and if it was real, then what actually happened in the Pilliga that night to poor old Bongo? Obviously, it was enough to put him in like an asylum. So man, but that was the main thing that I wanted to touch here. Was that clip, because it's like, to me, it's like a classic example of creepy stuff that you hear about or that you see, and yeah, I think it holds up. But anyway, moving on to our third story. And this one, so the first two ones that we went on were, anecdotal, obviously. How much of those could we actually verify? Pretty much none of it, right? We know that there's certain things about those areas, and We know that there was a kid who went missing or something because we have a news story about it. As far as all the other details, it's, who actually knows. This last story is going to be the most comprehensive one, and it is massive. This is an infamous event, and there's a lot of stuff that's been gone over and stuff. It still has its elements of not knowing whether or not it's like how much of it is real, how much of it is rumor, stuff like that. But the last thing we're going to talk about is the Dyatlov Pass incident. And the reason I'm doing this is because a year ago, for Halloween, I actually played a game called Kholat. And Kholat is a game that is loosely based, and I really mean loosely, based on the Dyatlov Pass incident. And I remember hearing about this some years ago. I got like a really basic overview of it, and it was so strange that I thought it might be worth going over, just because, it's so odd. So I've spent the last day or two just kind of looking over the details and compiling them together, and I thought we'd go over it. So, unfortunately, between yesterday and today, half my show notes got eaten by my PC somehow. I don't know if they just didn't get saved or what. So I had to very quickly recompile them. I'm going to try to get all the facts straight, because this is a massive body of information regarding this event. So if you're not familiar with the Dyatlov Pass incident, I'll give you a basic rundown here. So in 1959, in the Soviet Union, an electrical engineering student by the name of Igor Dyatlov got together a group of 10 people for a hiking expedition into the Ural Mountains. So the 10 people are Dyatlov himself, who is 23. You have Yuri Dorshenko, who is 21. You have Ludmila Dubinina. I don't know, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce the last name. 20 years old. You have Grigory Krivonashenko, 23. Alexander Kolevatov, 24. Zinaida Komogorova, 22. Rustem Slobodin, 23. Nikolai Thibault Brignoles, 23. And Semyon Zolotaryov, 38. He's 38 years old. Also, I would like to apologize from the start. I'm going to butcher a lot of these Russian names, just so you know from the start. Now, you might notice that's only 9 people. There was a 10th person that was slated to go with them by the name of Yuri Yudin, and he was 21 at the time, and he wound up canceling his participation in this expedition because he fell ill, which, as it turns out, is very lucky for him. Once we kind of get into this. So, Igor Dyatlov gathers together these 10 technically people, but only 9 go. And all of them are like experienced hikers. So at the time, the Soviet Union gave out classifications for certain things, and one of them was hiking. So all of these people, even though they're young, they're all college students. They're all essentially people from his college. Most of them are students, with the exception of Semyon Zolotarov, the 38-year-old, who I believe is some sort of faculty. I don't know exactly what position he holds, but he got them all together. They all have what's called Class 2 hiking certification. So they're not like inexperienced people. They know what's going on. I mean, if you think about college students, you're like, oh yeah, okay. Like a bunch of doofus college students go out there and get in trouble or whatever. It's not like that, right? These are all people who are experienced with hiking. They've done it before. And in fact, all of them are at the point in their hiking hobby, career, whatever you want to call it, to the point where the reason they're going on this expedition is that once they do it, they'll fulfill the requirement to get the highest classification, which is Class 3. And then on top of that, Dyatlov himself and also the faculty member, Zolotaryov, both are experienced skiers, with Zolotaryov being, I believe, a ski instructor. So both of them have a lot of experience with dealing with, wintry, snowy slopes and those sorts of environments, knowing how to navigate them, knowing the dangers that are associated with them, and that'll be important. Right? That's something of note for later. So, you have these 9 people, and they set out on an expedition from Sverdlovsk city in Sverdlovsk Oblast to a mountain by the name of Gora Otorten, which is about 340 miles away. It's about 550 kilometers to the north. It's on the northern border of Sverdlovsk Oblast. And so they set out. They leave on, I believe it was January 23rd, something like that. They leave in late January, and wind up going north, pretty long ways. Most of the expedition is pretty uneventful, and we know that because not most of them, but many of the hikers were carrying cameras with them. They had it all plotted out. You know, the local governments actually had this on file. They knew where they were supposed to go, all that. And judging by the cameras and also the diaries that the hikers carried with them, everything seemed to be going pretty well. And they traveled very far north. In fact, they almost got to Gora Otorten, but stopped just short of it. According to all the pictures that you can see, and what's interesting about this story is that you can actually go online and find all these pictures. They're all like available to the public. In fact, there was a website called Dyatlov-Pass.com that has a lot of the compiled evidence and stuff surrounding this, and there's a lot of theories and stuff that get floated on that website as well by different people. This is one of those instances that happened so long ago because it was, you know, over 60 years ago. People have had a lot of time to chew on it, and there are so many rabbit holes as far as investigation into this, right? Like all the little facets of this story, like you could spend an entire stream on just one facet of it. Like that's how deep the rabbit hole goes on this, because it's so strange. And we'll get into why it's so strange in a little bit. But they make their way north. Everything seems to be going fine. If you look at the pictures through most of the expedition, they're hiking through the snow, and they're obviously joking around and having a good time, right? Maybe toward the end they start getting a little bit tired and stuff in some of their pictures. And then the last pictures that you get from them, they're in this snowstorm. So whenever they get up almost to Gora Otorten, which is the mountain that they're supposed to be going toward, it's speculated that what happened was a storm blew in. And I'm not entirely sure how far away this is from where they actually meant to go for their final destination. I shouldn't use Final Destination. That's a movie. Their final, but you know what I mean. Technically, it's accurate. They go to this area that's actually really close, so they almost made it. I want to say it was only like 10 kilometers away or something like that. It was like unbelievably close. They almost made it. And the storm blows in, and they wind up getting kind of mixed up and changing course. The speculation is that they intended to go over a pass through by a mountain and wound up going up toward the peak of the mountain instead, thinking that they were headed toward this Gora Otorten mountain. In reality, what they were doing is they were climbing up a mountain called Kholat Syakhl, which is a Mansi word for dead mountain. Now the Mansi, just to clarify, the Mansi are like a local natives that live in the area. They're like reindeer herders and hunters and stuff like that. And the name Dead Mountain is actually not supposed to be as foreboding as it sounds, right? From what I understand, the Mansi meaning for this is just like in regards to game, right? It's like, oh, don't go to Dead Mountain if you're hunting because there's no game up there. Like you're just wasting your time, sort of thing. But in that strange way that high strangeness tends to have synchronicities and stuff, it is called by the Mansi Dead Mountain. And unfortunately for these 9 people, that namesake would kind of hold true, because they wound up going up this mountain, seemingly realizing their mistake is the speculation, and then they had a decision to make. They either had to go back down the mountain and find the pass they were originally trying to go through, or they would have to just make camp and try to wait out the storm. Now, this is supposedly at the end of January, and they were expected to be back no later than February 12th. So they made good time. They would have had time to like not have to rush things. So, maybe they decided they didn't want to give up the elevation they made. Maybe they decided that, hey, we've got time, let's just hunker down and try to wait out the storm or whatever. Either way, ultimately what they decided to do was to set up camp and just... Now, what happens later is what makes this such a weird and creepy story. So they set up camp, and then we're not sure exactly what time it was, because this seemed to happen like over a day or so. And in fact, we don't even necessarily know what the time frames are here, and that'll be relevant later too. But anyway, there's before we get into that, actually, the thing that prompted me to talk about this was, one, I streamed a game that was loosely based on it last year for Halloween, and two, I saw a article from the Smithsonian. It was released in 2021, I believe. So the headline, this is by Malin Solly for the Smithsonian Mag, and the headline reads, "Have scientists finally unraveled the 60-year mystery surrounding 9 Russian hikers' deaths?" Today, the so-called Dyatlov Pass incident, named after the group's leader, 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, is one of Russia's most enduring mysteries, spawning conspiracy theories as varied as a military cover-up, a UFO sighting, an abominable snowman attack, radiation fallout from secret weapons tests, and a clash with the indigenous Mansi people. But as Robin George Andrews reports for National Geographic, new research published in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment points toward a more sensible, quote-unquote, explanation, drawing on advanced computer modeling to posit that an unusually timed avalanche sealed the hiker's fate. We do not want to claim to have solved the Dyatlov Pass mystery, as no one survived to tell the story. Lead author Johann Gaume said to the head of the Snow and Avalanche Simulation Laboratory at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Tells Live Science Brain Inspector, but we show the plausibility of the avalanche hypothesis for the first time. In 2019, Russian authorities announced plans to revisit the incident, which they attributed not to a crime, but to an avalanche, a snow slab, or a hurricane. The following year, the inquiry pinned the hikers' deaths on a combination of an avalanche and poor visibility, as the state-owned RIA news agency reported on July 2020, the official findings suggested that a torrent of snow slabs, or blocky chunks, surprised the sleeping victims and pushed them to seek shelter at a nearby ridge. Unable to see more than 50 feet ahead, the hikers froze to death as they attempted to make their way back to their tent. Given the official findings' lack of key scientific details, quote-unquote, as well as the Russian government's notorious lack of transparency, however, this explanation failed to quell the public's curiosity for National Geographic. And boy, did it ever. Because the actual details that you get from this are so bizarre, and like, in my opinion, they don't really meet the requirements. Like, that explanation of an avalanche doesn't work to explain what the heck happened here. And we're gonna go down the list of the order of discovery, how all of these people were discovered, and the circumstances they were discovered in. And then, like I said before, I'll let people decide themselves if this is of what actually happened here. So, in early February, I believe this was February 2nd or 3rd, something like that. It's like right at the beginning of February was when this day took place, supposedly. So the storm came, they hunkered down for the evening, and then as they were in their tent, something happened. We don't know what happened, but all we have is the evidence that was provided to us whenever everything had settled down much later, which was actually February 26th. So almost a month had gone by before they actually found everyone. And actually, they didn't even find everyone, but that's when they started finding it's when they found the tent, it's when they found the first bodies. So I'm going to go down kind of a list of the circumstances that the bodies were found in. So on February 26th was when they first found the campsite. The tent they found was abandoned with all of its belongings still inside. So they had essentially left the tent with most of their stuff, or without most of their stuff. So most of their stuff was still inside the tent when they left. The tent had been cut or ripped open from the inside. So presumably someone on the inside had to make a quick getaway or something like that. We don't know why they did that. And then finally, 9 pairs of footprints, so they accounted for all of the hikers, were leading down to the wood line below. It's worth noting that most of these footprints were not. So most of the footprints they found, and in fact this would correlate, or this would corroborate with the state they find the bodies in. Most of them were not wearing shoes, for whatever reason. They decided to up and leave their camp in negative 25 degree Fahrenheit, whatever, weather without shoes. They would only have socks, or I believe some of them were even barefoot, which is a very strange thing for experienced hikers to do, especially in the area. They know the area and stuff. So they wind up following the footprints, the investigators do, and it leads them to a cedar tree. And under the cedar tree, or near the cedar tree, they find the bodies of the first two hikers. That is Doroshenko and Krivonashenko. Next to the bodies, they find the remains of a small fire. So presumably they managed to get a fire going, even if it was small, in a storm. We're not sure if the storm was still going at the time. It would be, if you've ever gone camping or something like that, you'll know that trying to get a fire going whenever there's stuff blowing around is actually pretty difficult. So the fact they got a small fire going, you know, who knows what that means, but it could be relevant. And then finally, a nearby cedar tree had its branches broken up to 5 meters high from the base. So whenever I first read that, I mistakenly took that to mean that all of the branches were broken, right? It's like all the branches around the tree were broken up to 5 meters high. That's about 15 feet, which is well above the average height of a person. But I saw actual photos of this picture. Both the original investigators took photos of it, and also the tree is still alive. It's still alive. They've located it. They know where it is, and then you can see modern photos of it. And the branches are broken on one side. So the idea is like, what happened there? Did something crash through it? Like, did one of the main theories, I think probably the most prominent theory, is that one of the hikers tried to climb up into the tree and wound up breaking one of the branches and then crashing back down through them. There were also evidence of cut branches nearby that had been cut with a knife, presumably to try to start a fire. But no knife was actually found at the cedar tree site. So they canvassed the area between the cedar tree and the campsite, and in that area they find the bodies of Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin between the cedar tree where the remains of Doroshenko and Krivonashenko were found, and the campsite that they originally abandoned. So everything's very mysterious. They obviously take the bodies and they do autopsies and stuff like that. And a little over 2 months pass, and it's now May 4th, 1959, and this is when they finally find the bodies of the other four. And this is where things get even more weird. So they finally discover the bodies of Kolevatov, Zolotaryov, Ludmila, and Nikolai. They find them in the bottom of a ravine, which is about 75 feet further into the wood line, right? It's not back toward the camp. It's in the wood line from the cedar tree. They're found in a ravine, in a stream in the bottom of a ravine under 13 foot of snow, which presumably is snow that came in, it's like fresh snowfall that came in after the event. And that's very strange, right? Because it's like, okay, so what's the order of events here? Like, what explains the positioning of all these things? Now I'm going to go into the circumstances of the specific like details that they found them in, and this is where everything gets just absolutely bananas. So let's see here. All right. So what they determined, they get all the bodies together, they bring them for autopsies and stuff, and they document all of the circumstances that they found the bodies in. And here's what they found. And this is what I could like just do like a baseline like fact sheet of what they found, what I could verify. So 6 of the 9, that is Dyatlov, Doroshenko, Krivonashenko, Kolevatov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, are all found to have died of hypothermia. So they froze to death in the area, the Ural Mountains. The remaining 3, which is Zolotaryov, Nikolai, and Ludmila, are found to have died of traumatic injuries. So they didn't freeze to death, they were actually injured by something, and that's what led to their deaths. Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, which are the 3 that they found between the camp and the cedar tree, so those were the second set of bodies they found, were found facing the campsite in poses insinuating that they were trying to return to the tent, right? They were trying to get back to the campsite from presumably from the cedar tree site that they found. We're not sure why they would go back after they left. We're not even sure why they left in the first place. The location of Zolotaryov, Nikolai, and Ludmila and Klevatov's bodies is disputed, but none in the direction of the campsite from the cedar tree. So you have the cedar tree where they tried to build a fire, presumably. And then you have Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Slobodin try to go back to the tent. And the other four somehow wound up about 75 meters further into the wood line, not back toward the tent, from the cedar tree. Now, as I said, it's disputed where exactly they found them. We know they found them in a stream. It's a little bit important as far as like where it is, but none of the supposed places that were said by the investigators, because all of them seem to have a different place they say it was, none of them are directly back toward the camp. So we're trying to figure out exactly where they went to first. It seems like they all went to the cedar tree first, and then there was a splitting up, right? Doroshenko, Krivonashenko stayed at the cedar tree, tried to build a fire maybe. The other three tried to go back to the camp. Maybe they went back for supplies or something like that. But for some reason, the other four left. They went further into the wood line for some reason, and we still don't know why. Krivonashenko and Doroshenko are found only in their underwear. So they're not wearing any sort of clothes besides just their like long johns. Krivonashenko, autopsy reports that he has a burn on his leg. We don't know necessarily what caused that. I mean, they did try to start a fire. Maybe he burned his leg with it. Slobodin's autopsy reports a small, non-fatal fracture in his skull. So maybe there was, I don't know, maybe he fell or something like that. It's possible. We don't know. And these get stranger in the order as I've got them laid out. And this is where things get especially strange. Zolotaryov and Ludmila, who again were found 75 meters further into the woodland in the bottom of a ravine in a stream, they both died of major chest fractures. So something caused major chest fractures, and that's what the autopsy found they died of. It wasn't hypothermia. It wasn't like some posthumous damage that happened to them. The autopsy found that that is specifically what they died of. So they suffered major chest fractures by something while they were still alive. Nikolai, who was found with them, died of a major skull fracture. Klevatov's autopsy reports his eyebrows were missing, which is maybe not as strange as you might think, because these were found in a stream, right? Considerably later. Maybe the eyebrows just fell out for some reason. We don't know. Volodyaryov's autopsy reports, and this is going to get a little bit graphic, so I apologize. Both of his eyebrows and his eyes were missing. Ludmila's autopsy report, which is the worst, reports that both of her eyes, her tongue, a portion of her lip, and a fragment of her skull were missing. And then, I think this is maybe the weirdest part of it, is Nikolai, who was found along with the three others in the same, like, situation they were, was reported as having none of these missing. Like, he was just, nothing of that sort was wrong with him. Some of the other hikers were found with the scavenged clothes of other hikers. Of note is Ludmila, who was found to be wearing, or presumably was found to be wearing, Krivonashenko's burned pants. And this is really important for the order of events that's going on here. Because if the idea here, well, I'll continue and then we'll get into speculation afterwards. So one of the doctors who was sort of investigating the bodies, right? He's doing autopsies and things. He's inspecting. One Dr. Vozrozdeny reports that the fractures are more than a human could do. And this is important because he comes out with this in response to a theory that was going on at the time, back in 1959, speculating that maybe they had been attacked by some local Mansi hunters or something like that, and they'd been murdered. This guy says, no, it's the kind of fractures that we see in their bodies is not something that a human could do to them. And he specifically, like, verbatim, or, he specifically likens it to being struck by a car, he says, is his report. But, and this is one of the most bizarre parts about this story, is that there is no reports, they can find no soft tissue damage associated with the fractures. So they weren't hit by something, right? It wasn't like someone, it's not like something fell on them or whatever. Their soft tissues and stuff were all still intact. They didn't show any signs of damage from like an impact or anything like that. But their internal bones were showing massive fracturing by some sort of force that was immense, more than a human could do, which is also very, very, very strange. And then the final point here, and this one is, I don't know, it's hard to find details on this, but at least one of the hikers was found to have radioactive clothing. The details surrounding that, they're a little bit sparse. It's hard to track down. It's not necessarily reliable. And the reason why is because, it's 1959. Obviously, you've got the Cold War going on. The Soviet Union's probably not super keen on releasing details about radioactive anything. So that could be one of the reasons why. Another reason could be that it was maybe it was something that was implanted by one of the investigators. Like, there's other stuff that I'm not going to get into in the stream. Talking about how, like, even the investigators were kind of doubting each other and wondering if they were actually on the up and up and stuff. There was a lot of suspicion going on among them in some areas. So it's hard to find information. We don't know if that's because it actually happened and they tried to cover it up, or if it was just like a mistranslation or a misunderstanding, and so therefore there's just not actually details in reality about it. So, having these details in mind it paints a weird picture, right? Because a lot of it doesn't line up. You have the order of events is presumably they set up camp for the night. Something happens that kicks this whole episode off. I've heard reports that the signs that they left when they left the camp were not like, they seemingly weren't in a hurry. How they determine that, I don't know. So, like, did they leave in a panicked state? Did they leave in a calm state? Why did they leave without their shoes? We don't know. But they wind up leaving their camp. Presumably because the tracks lead to the tree. All 9 sets of footprints lead to the tree, so we know that that's where they went first. They got together, it seems like they tried to make a fire, and then from there they split up. But this is really interesting, right? Because you have 3 of these hikers who, the presumption is they were hit by an avalanche, and 3 of those hikers received lethal injuries from it, right? They were crushed by, a snowpack or a big chunk of snow, whatever, that slid down and landed on top of them while they were camping. But here's the problem with that, is that you have one of those, in fact, the 4 that were found in the ravine are in many ways better dressed than many of the other hikers. And the fact that Ludmila, who was found in the ravine with lethal injuries to her, lethal fractures in her chest, is found wearing, what was it? I believe it was Krivonashenko's pants. And we know that was Krivonashenko's pants because those pants were burned in the same spot that he had a burn on his leg, right? So very quickly you realize that, like, the order of events don't make a whole lot of sense here. It would kind of insinuate that the ones who were found in the ravine later probably sustained their injuries later, right? So those injuries weren't by a avalanche. They were done by something else, presumably. And the fact that it's such a weird injury and there's no soft tissue damage associated with those fractures makes it extremely weird, right? Like, what could have caused it? And I mean, the answer is no one knows. So it seems like the first 6 that died of hypothermia, it would seem to indicate that they're the ones who died first. And then bizarrely, the ones who received the lethal injuries, who you'd think would die first, wound up surviving for longer than them. Not only surviving longer, but also having the strength to somehow get out further away from the campsite than the other ones who just died of hypothermia. To me, that's a really weird detail and doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and kind of like gets rid of this whole idea that, oh, an avalanche fell on them. You know what I mean? Like, obviously there's something else going on there. And like I said, this is a very high profile case. And anytime you're dealing with high-profile paranormal type stories, not only are you like wrestling with the facts, but you're also wrestling with this kind of like game of telephone. So it's a very high-profile story. It's been around for over 60 years now, and so you're also dealing with this 60-year game of telephone, where it's like, okay, we're getting secondhand information. You know, how much of it is reliable, how much of it is right, how much of it is wrong. Did one of these investigators, who are like our main sources of information, did one of them get a detail wrong, or like did they say something and then because all of this is translated from Russian, did something get lost in translation, or did something get added in translation? Right? There's always that sort of thing, but from my personal opinion, like this whole thing that you occasionally see with like the Smithsonian's doing here and National Geographic, and they do this like skeptoid, hey, obviously the answer is a bird ate a certain type of seed and it flew over the mountain and pooped, and it shouted, and it had like the perfect resonance with the snow to make a snowdrift which crushed. You know what I mean? Like, there are explanations that are like that, and they're like, well, it's the most reasonable explanation we have. But at some point, you have to kind of go, well, even that still doesn't really explain what the heck happened here. And unfortunately, because we have some matters that are sort of differing in opinion, some things are just like, we don't know if it's true or not. In fact, most of it we don't know if it's true or not. Could have been a result of some sort of like censorship from the Soviet Union. Obviously, it's the Cold War. You got like this whole Iron Curtain thing, where maybe they just didn't want certain information getting out, or maybe they put out false information as like a counter-espionage maneuver. We don't know. Interestingly enough, I read that none of the, because you can actually go and find the autopsies and stuff of these. You can find the actual photos. And back then, autopsies were written, handwritten out. You can find photos of the autopsies. Unfortunately, I can't read Russian, so I couldn't read them. But you can find translations of them. And from what I could find in the translations, I didn't see anywhere where they talk about the state of internal organs, which seems like an oversight on the part of the autopsy. I feel like they usually do that. I do recall reading in Lumila's autopsy that they did take sections of her organs, internal organs, for testing, but they don't have any report as for that. So who knows actually if that's important or not. It seems like it should be, but maybe they just did autopsies different back then, right? Maybe we only have the initial autopsies where they're just poking at the body and they don't include any of the like later testing that they would have to do with organs or whatever. I'm not sure. But the whole thing is so bizarre, where it's just like so much stuff doesn't seem to add up, and there's a reason why this has been an ongoing mystery for 60 years. And unfortunately, because again, it's very high profile, so many people have thrown their hat in the ring with so many theories and stuff like that, that it's almost at the point where people just kind of like choose the one they want the most, and then they go with whatever set of data best supports what they want to hear, which is unfortunate, but that may be as close to the truth as we get as far as this one's concerned. Of all the three stories tonight, this one is the one that has the most evidence behind it, and even still, like, the more evidence and clues you see just makes more questions, which is obviously the hallmark of a great piece of mystery. So, anyway, these are all we're checking out, especially the Dyatlov Pass. Like I said, this thing is so massive and there's so many rabbit holes you can go down with Dyatlov Pass that I did not even scratch the surface of it. I tried to compile details as best I could that I could verify. Some of these may be wrong. I don't know. Like maybe I got someone who is mistaken in one of their assumptions or whatever. I tried to verify as much as I could. And from that, I just took it from reported sources. Hopefully it's right. I don't know if it is or not. But yeah, this is something that someone could really spend, I guess, years of their life doing, and I would guess that many people probably do spend most of their life, or many years of their life, looking into this kind of stuff. But anyway, that is the final story. What actually happened? Much like the other ones, I just have to shrug and go, I don't know, man. You have to decide that for yourself. Like, it's definitely worth looking into, like I said. If you want to be sad, you want to be a little bit sad, you can go online and look up the photos for Dyatlov Pass. Like, this final story, it is weird. It causes you to ask a lot of questions when you look at the sort of, right, you do like what's his name? Sherlock Holmes Mind Palace, like, analysis of all the things, of all the clues and stuff, and you're like, oh, what's the order of events? And obviously this must have happened then, because the timelines don't match or whatever. But if you step back away from, like, the analysis of it, in my opinion, I almost didn't do this story, because to me it's almost more sad than it is scary. You know what I mean? It almost feels like a sad Halloween story, because obviously, 9 people died, and not only were they 9 people, but they were like prime of their life people, The only one who's not in his early 30s was Zolotaryov. He's an old fart like me, but even still, like, 38 is still tragically young to die. So if you want to be sad, or you want that really gritty kind of connection to the story, you can go online and you can look at the photos that they recovered, because obviously all the cameras that they had, they did take pictures most of the way, and you can go look at their photos, and some of them have pictures of them with their families back home and stuff, or they're out in the wilderness palling around, goofing around, big smiles on their face, they're off on this adventure and stuff, and everything was going smoothly until one day tragedy struck. And the thing that makes it scary is we don't know what that tragedy is, but that doesn't make it any less sad, truth be told. Something that may be worth of interest, I don't personally think it's all that compelling, but in terms of cameras, I believe the only one that was found with a camera on their body was Zolotaryov. He was one of the ones that was found in the stream, which means that his film is subject to the elements, and subject to water damage and stuff like that. But he does have photos on it. Whether any of those photos have anything to do with whatever the heck happened to them that night, we don't know. I've looked at the photos. I mean, to me, it just looks like mostly black, like overexposure, weird stuff with like blobs and things. There's really no, I couldn't find anything in it that was all that compelling. Some people claim that it is. That's something that people can look into as well if they want to. But anyway, one of the most high-profile unsolved mysteries to this day. There you go, in a nutshell. All right, that's all I have, so I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening in. I appreciate anyone who does this. This is sort of an experimental thing, like I said. And it was fun, I've often said that I'm not a fan of horror games, and that's true. I don't like jump scares or anything like that. I find horror games to be a little hokey. Like, I just can't really get into them very well. But stuff like this, I love high strangeness and like reports of real paranormal stuff or odd stuff, abnormal stuff. I find it really interesting, and I'm very thankful to have an opportunity to yap about it on a stream for almost an hour and 15, or a little over an hour and 15 minutes. And I hope that, whoever's watching it or whoever will watch it later, the VOD, will get a kick out of it and find it very interesting. All right, with that, I'm going to retire for the evening. I hope everyone has a happy and awesome Halloween. And, yeah, as always, keep calm and ramble on, Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And most of the stuff I guess half the things I would do, don't do.